Hello and welcome to Trusts and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and we're here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time to start off your week talking about issues related to estate planning, the administration of trusts and estates, both from your own personal perspective of what you need to do in your finances and as part of being a professional who helps other people do these tasks. So today, I'm going to talk about a situation where you're appointed, perhaps, or selected, whatever the word may be, to handle the probate of an estate and how you can do that more easily. So I compiled 6 tips that I think will help you figure this out. And while, look, I don't mean to take away business from my fellow professionals, the reality is, if it's a small estate um, with maybe just a few assets and nothing particularly complex, so there's really no reason to necessarily hire a professional fiduciary like myself. You can probably do this on your own and save some money for the estate, and especially if you're the beneficiary, so that accrues to your benefit for sure. But in any event, um, you know. Uh, to get a professional like me involved, typically there's a significant amount of money at stake, and or there's some complicated issues that have to be dealt with, and so it takes experience and knowledge to do that well. But for a typical small estate, these tips, I think, will help you stay on top of what you need to do and accomplish it without too much trouble. So the first thing that I think you need to do is to understand the process itself. So probate is a legal process. There are certain steps that must be taken in order to comply with the law. And before sort of diving into it, it's worthwhile having a basic understanding of how that works. Now, the good news is you can go look at previous episodes of the show, and I go through at various times explanations of different parts of the probate process. I do have a show, and I'll link it in the show notes, that talks in about the probate process, just as an overview. And I would encourage you, if you're an executor in a will, or if you think you're going to be appointed as a personal representative, or maybe you're the trustee in a trust, take a look at that and get a sense of what it is you're going to need to do. And that way you can determine, gee, does this sound like something that I'm not going to have any problems with, or not going to have very many problems with? Or is this something that's more complicated than I want to deal with? Look, it may be at whatever point in your life you're at. Maybe you have, young children, you're holding down a job, you're married, you have a lot on your plate. And it may be that, in seeing what this entails, you realize, what, this is not something that I want to take on in addition to everything else that I'm doing. And that way, perhaps it's your parent who wants you to be the executor, and you can say, hey, mom, dad, I'm familiarized myself with what I would need to do to be your executor. And gosh, I think I'm really going to be challenged to handle that. So is there some different arrangement that we can make? Or, you know, can I have the option to hire someone to help me with this, so that I can get it done, but it doesn't take a lot of my time? Maybe I can just work with somebody who can handle things, and that way it won't take away from my ability to do my job and take care of my spouse and children, etc. So that's a the first step, the first tip that I have for you is to, spend a little bit of time figuring out what is this going to entail, and that way you can have a sense of whether it's something you really want to take on. So the next tip I have is gather your documents early and organize the financial information. Now, this can be the case on in two different fronts. So if you're anticipating being appointed as an executor, I'm just going to use the term personal representative. So that entails in loosely an executor as well as an administrator appointed by the court. So if you're anticipating being a personal representative or a trustee, so you want to make sure that the financial information that you'll need in order to fill that role is collected in one place. It could be in a notebook, in hard copy form, or it could be in a file on some sort of shared drive like a Google Drive or Dropbox. That's my favorite platform, frankly. Or it could even be on a thumb drive, as long as that thumb drive is kept up to date. Although these days, I don't know, are thumb drives even used anymore? I know I haven't used one in a long time since when I was in the Navy and the federal government decreed that we could not use that kind of media anymore. But in any event, first of all, you want to have a copy of the will, a copy of the trust, if that is applicable, healthcare power of attorneys, durable power of attorneys. So you want to have copies of all these documents in one place. And then you want to have copies of all the financial documents. And by the way, I did a show last week on digital assets, and I looked at that very broadly. I encourage you to take a look at that as well, because it talks about the need to have passwords, access to social media accounts, that sort of thing, and how you might want to do that. So all of that should be gathered in one place. And that way, when it comes time for you to assume the role of personal representative, you're not searching around to find everything that you need. By the way, having had to do that, I can tell you that's among the most time-consuming parts of administrating an estate. Is trying to figure out, have I found all the assets? Do I have all the records? Are these the most up to date? Is this the most up to date copy of the will? All those kind of things. So the better organized that is up front, the easier it will be to administrate down the road. Now, if you're dealing with your own estate plan, so then it really behooves you to put those records together, gather all those documents, have them in one place, so that whoever you have appointed to be your personal representative, they don't have the burden of having to find all that stuff. So, again, this is part of our responsibility in putting an estate plan together. Now, let me add that typically when our lawyer puts together the estate plan, so they'll create a whole package of documents, and that's great. And so all those documents will be together. You can put them into a folder and on your computer, or like I said, on some kind of shared drive. But that's just the beginning. So if they're, statements of assets, a list of real estate, if that exists, a list of valuable personal property, jewelry, art. Okay, now, by the way, you don't have to list every single thing that you have. Most of the time, most of the personal property we have doesn't really have any significant value, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you do have, maybe you have a particularly valuable car, for example, or maybe, again, you have a valuable piece of art. Maybe you have a coin collection, something like that. So in those cases, you do want to have information about that and have that all together in one place with all the other important documents. Third tip is create a timeline so that you can stay on top of deadlines and regularly review your progress. Okay, so when somebody dies, from that moment forward, there is a series of deadlines that in general you'll need to comply with. So first of all, you're going to have to get copies of the death certificate. That's you know that should have been done automatically by the physician who determined that the person in fact was deceased. Okay, so it may mean contacting the county recorder's office and probably paying a fee. Sometimes it can take a while for that to be processed, and sometimes there are expedited ways to get copies of the death certificates. And by the way, just a little tip on that: when you go to get the death certificate, get multiple original copies, okay? Because there are circumstances where you will have to submit an original. For example, if you're canceling a passport, you'll need to submit an original. Some of the credit card companies may require an original copy. So if you only have one copy, you can only do those things one at a time. That can be frustrating. So a lot of times they will return that original to you. But in the meantime, if you only have one copy, you can only handle one account at a time. So I recommend getting, 5, 6, even 10, depending on how complicated the estate is. If there are lots and lots and lots of accounts, so then you may want more. If there's just a handful of accounts, so maybe 2, 3, 4 it is enough. Okay, but that's step number one on the timeline. And depending on how big your county is, though, that can take let's see, I applied for a death certificate for a friend a few months ago here in LA County, and I think it took close to a month for the county to process that request and send out the death certificates. Whereas in a smaller county, I think it would probably happen much more quickly. And in fact, in a small county, you might be able to just go down to the county recorder's office and get it right then and there. Okay, so that that will depend on your jurisdiction. So once you have the death certificate, there are other deadlines, things like reporting to the county assessor. There's been a change of ownership, the deadline for submitting the estate tax return, okay, or the final tax return for the decedent. All of those things need to be plotted out. Now, keep in mind that most of these deadlines are going to relate to the city or county in which the person either died or has property, or the state, again, in which they died or have property. Now, with respect to the estate tax return, that's a federal issue. It's one of the few federal issues dealing with trusts and estates. And that return is due 9 or 10 months after the date of death. I'm going up on that. Let me think about this for a second. I think it's 9 months after the date of death. Check with your accountant to be sure about that. But in any, and by the way, you like with other types of tax returns, you can apply for an extension, but you don't want to miss the deadline, even if you are planning on applying for an extension. And by the way, unlike with regular tax returns, on an estate tax return, there is the ability to apply for an extension to pay the taxes. Okay, now that doesn't mean you get that extension for free. It just means that you avoid paying certain penalties, but you're going to pay. Typically, you'll pay interest. But in any event, you want to have a sense of what that timeline is for the jurisdiction in which, again, the person died and/or has property. Okay, and have that timeline, at least roughed out. And that way you can stay on top of those deadlines. Now, I know for me, I use I'm Apple computer user, so there's a program that comes on every Apple called Reminders, and I use that to keep track of my to do list. There's lots and lots of to do list apps around these days. I know if my friend Bill uses one where I guess it's kind of like you have a contest with everybody else who uses it to see who can get the most tasks done. And he likes that. It's a fun thing for him. So, but I would recommend you get some sort of to-do list app, or you can make a paper to-do list as well. It's just it's not as easy to revise it, and you can you can put in your deadlines and that you know about, just as kind of a what's the word I'm looking for, a template, and then at the time you really need to use it, so then you can start filling in the details, and that's that could be a good way to handle that. But in any event, I really encourage you to have some method. There are so many little details to keep track of when you're administrating an estate. It's really hard to keep them in your head without dropping some of them. Okay, and then that way, if you have that to-do list, you will be able to regularly track your progress, right? So like I'll just bring this up. So it's over here on this side. So I'm looking at reminders right now, and I can see, for one project, I have 22 to dos. I have only one on another one. On another one, I have four, right? So depending on, which project it is that I'm dealing with, so that I can keep track of my progress. And, one of the things that I've noticed, in administrating estates is there's a lot of work at the beginning. So, you know, on one project I'm working on, I think, sometimes I would, on a particular day, I have a list of 20 things to do, which of course was more than I was going to get done in that particular day. And many of those items took multiple days, sometimes weeks, even months to get done. Okay, but what I've noticed is, that number has gone down over time. So now, it's rare for me to have more than 8 to maybe 10 at the most on my list for any particular day. And in many cases, it's on the list just to remind me to touch base with someone who is handling something, that sort of thing. Okay, so again, you want to, being a good estate administrator does take attention to detail, and the best thing you can do is keep an up-to-date to-do list of some kind, so you don't drop anything. Okay, next, tip number 4: delegate tasks and hire professionals. So just because you are the personal representative doesn't mean that you have to do every single thing. And in fact, there are some things you probably should not do. So, for example, if you are not a probate attorney, you probably should not be filing legal documents. They can be very complex, and so it's easy to make a mistake. And no one is expecting you, or hopefully no one is expecting you, as a personal representative who's not a lawyer, especially a probate lawyer, to have that level of legal knowledge. And so you're going to want to work with a probate attorney. Okay, I know in every case I've worked on, I've worked with a probate attorney or an attorney who deals with trusts. Again, it depends on exactly what the estate entailed. But in any event, I always am teamed up with a lawyer. Okay, and that's because I'm not a lawyer. Okay, and as long as I've been doing this, and as good as my legal knowledge is, it doesn't mean that I'm qualified to practice law. So part of every team involves a lawyer. I also always team up with an accountant. Again, I've done my own taxes for many years. I think I have a pretty good working knowledge of taxes, but I do not have a working knowledge of how to prepare estate tax returns. That's a specialty, and it takes an accountant who knows how to do that. Okay, and just a regular accountant who's never done it before may not know how to prepare an estate tax return. So you want to have an accountant who has experience in that area, right? And I have a few that I work with. In fact, few weeks ago I had Robert uh, Karpas, I believe, on the show, and I encourage you to check out that episode, and you can see that Robert has specialized knowledge beyond that which a typical tax preparer would have. And then excuse me, I think earlier this year, it might have been the end of last year even, Roy Gia, who is very, very experienced in large trusts and estates, right? So as a matter of fact, one of the members of my group, Trust and Estates Experts, who was an accountant herself, had a question, and Roy was able to answer the question pretty much off the top of his head. So, and this doesn't take anything away from the accountant who asked the question. Quite to the contrary, she knew the limits of her knowledge, and she was seeking the answer to a question because it was beyond what she knew, right? And so I connected them up, and Roy was able to help her, and that way she can go on confidently with the work that she was doing. Okay, so minimally, you're as a personal representative, you're going to be working with a lawyer, working with an accountant. Now, you may work with other specialists. So if there's a lot of personal property, multiple residences, for example, and the heirs aren't quite sure what they want to do with all the stuff, right, that the decedent left behind. So then you may want someone to help you with that. So it sounds like a litany of people I know, but my friend Heather Heather Cooper, so her business Uncluttered, that's something she specializes in. Okay, and that's very, very useful. Now, you as the personal representative, you may take it on yourself to do that, to go through everything, especially if you're the beneficiary. On the other hand, if you're, again, very busy, okay, and you don't have the time to spend, hours and days going through all of the personal property of the decedent. So then you may bring in someone else to help you with that, and they can go through everything and give you kind of a basic inventory. They can give you kind of, here's a list of furniture, here's a list of, potentially valuable personal property, what in here do you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so it might be useful to delegate that task out. By the way, if there's multiple beneficiaries, even though you're the personal representative, you may have the other beneficiaries help you with some of these tasks. For example, going through the personal property and decide if, a lot of times, with maybe only a few exceptions, the decedent won't say what they want done with, their clothes and all of their personal effects, maybe dishes, whatever, books, and so what's going to happen with all of that. So look, maybe you have a sibling who they don't have as busy a life as you do, and they would enjoy kind of going through things, maybe having a chance to sort of reminisce about the decedent, if it's a parent or whatever, and then sort of letting the other beneficiaries know, hey, look, here's what I found, here's the stuff, and how can we divide this up so that it's reasonable for everybody. Okay, now by the way, when you're delegating tasks, one of the things you do want to be aware of is, as the personal representative, you do have the ultimate responsibility. So if delegating a task is going to raise more problems than it solves, especially because of whom you chose as your delegate. So then maybe you don't want to do that. So if there's bad feelings between siblings or those kind of things, so then maybe it's not a good idea to have them involved. You'd be better off perhaps hiring a professional, even though it'll cost some additional money. But in the long run, it may be better because it'll keep tempers low and that sort of thing. Okay, speaking of beneficiaries, tip number 5: communicate with beneficiaries. Okay, keep them up to date on what's happening in the process. Okay, so especially, and here's kind of the challenge with this, especially if people don't get along. Okay, the best way to deal with that usually is to keep everybody informed. Okay, because if people feel like they're in the dark, or being left in the dark, that can tend to, as you probably may have felt yourself, that think, what's going on with this? Hey, what are they doing? Am I being taken advantage of? Those are the thoughts that start coming up. So I recommend as soon as possible to create what we used to call we still call the military this, to create a battle rhythm. So a battle rhythm. So when I was deployed on the aircraft carrier, one of the first things my commanding officer did was he set up a schedule for staff meetings. And I think at first it was twice a week, I want to say, or maybe it's 3 times a week. And he set out right away, these are the times we're meeting at this time here in my office. You're expected to be there. If you're not going to be there, I better know in advance that you're not going to be there and why, that kind of thing. And then I think over time, I think we started meeting, once a week. Getting that battle rhythm going makes sure that people are working together, that everybody knows what they need to know in order to feel like, number one, they're being treated respectfully. Number two, they have an opportunity to give their input. And number three, that things are being handled appropriately. So establish a battle rhythm as soon as you can if you're the personal representative for an estate. Because I mean, look, if you're the sole beneficiary and you're also the personal representative, so maybe it's not any big deal. But especially if there are other beneficiaries, so reporting to them periodically is a good idea. Now, maybe you don't need to report more than once a month. On the other hand, if it's a big estate, very complicated, lots of issues, so maybe once a week. And by the way, it doesn't have to be verbally. It can be an email that you send out once a week. So for some estates that I'm administrating, I do send an email out once a week, usually at the end of the week, so that people know, okay, here's the progress that we've made in the previous week. Here's some of the things we're going to be working on next week. That's generally what I do once a week. Now, in other cases, I'll report once a month. Generally speaking, I don't report less than once a month because to be honest, that's my battle rhythm from years and years of being in the management business. And I think less than that, people really are entitled at that point to think, well, what's going on? What is this guy Kevin doing? Kind of thing. So do communicate with them, and that way you can manage expectations. You can hopefully deal with issues before they become heated, and make things go as smoothly as possible. Finally, this is tip number 6 is set up a system to keep detailed records and for bills and expenses. Now, generally speaking, if you're a lay person, so to speak, and you're a personal representative, you're not going to get compensated. Having said that, I highly, highly, highly recommend you keep track of your time, okay? Because you never know how things may change, okay? So the fact that you're not getting compensated or have agreed to serve without getting compensated doesn't mean that you are not entitled to compensation. And things can change, and you may decide that you are going to apply for compensation. So even if you keep just a spreadsheet with the date, the amount of time you spent, and a brief summary of what you did, I cannot stress strongly enough that you do that. You may get to it and close the estate and never use it, and that's fine. What I can tell you is the degree to which you will be kicking yourself if you don't do this and you do need it is much worse than any time you spend that you may in the end, don't need to have spent because everything worked out fine. Okay. Now, especially if you're going to be doing this more than once, okay? So if you have, both your parents are currently alive and one dies, and you're their executor or personal representative, and then the other one, and you just never know. So I would be highly encourage you to do that. Number one. Number two, do as much of your communicating in writing as possible. Now, again, emails are fine. You can also use text messages. They are harder to archive. Okay, so in general, anything that I'm doing that I think has any significance, I boil it down to some kind of email. Okay. And even to the point where sometimes I will have a telephone discussion with somebody, and then I will follow it up with an email, just summarizing our discussion. Here's what we talked about. Here's what we decided, and send that off to them. And that way, there's a record. Okay, and especially if you're a layperson, an email is typically going to be fine. You don't need to do formal memos to file like we used to do, or even conventional letters sent through the mail. Don't have to worry about that in most cases. Where you do want to keep those more formal types of records is if you are filling out any kind of forms. So, for example, the form you may fill out, I'm sorry, not the form, the letter that you have to send to cancel a passport. For sure, you want to keep a copy of that letter. Okay, for the form you have to fill out to cancel someone's voter registration, any kind of documents that you have to fill out regarding brokerage accounts, bank accounts, all of those, you definitely want to keep copies of those documents, and you want to keep them in some kind of logical order. Now, I'll tell you what I do, and that is I start every document I archive with the date. Okay, so for example, a document for today would have the date, would start out with the numbers 20240729, right? That's 2024 the year, 07 the month, 29 the 29th day of the month. Okay, and that way all the documents are kept in date sequence. Okay, and then a short description of what the document is after that date, and then I'll break them down. So, for example, there may be bank records, there may be brokerage account records, there may be real estate records. Okay, and I group them together in a logical way so that if I get audited, or if I need to get somebody a document, I can do so quickly. Now, I keep all of my documents on computer, although I may keep a few original documents in a file folder. 90% or more of the documents I keep are in digital form only. Of course, they're backed up into the cloud. They're backed up into a backup hard drive. So I have multiple copies, basically. Okay. to protect against, you know, a computer outage or a hack or something like that. Okay, but you do want to keep those. And again, I like Dropbox. Now, I know some people are very, very fond of Google Drive and all that. I frankly, I can't stand Google Drive. I find it really difficult to use. It doesn't have anything like the functionality of Microsoft Office in terms of spreadsheets and such. So I set up a Dropbox folder, and generally I'll have folders that are shared with different people. So for example, I have one of the matters I'm handling. One of the clients is in Florida, and like me, they are very sensitive about not sending things like tax ID numbers through email, which is not a good practice in my view, because email is pretty easy to hack. But Dropbox is a pretty secure platform from what my technology friends tell me. And so we have a shared folder that we can exchange documents through, and it's really convenient. It just sits on our, you know, the desktop of both our computers, and if we need to send each other a document, we just drop it in the folder and we're done. With other clients, I'll have a whole folder with, a folder with a whole set of subfolders in it on different matters, and that way they can keep up to date on with, you know, with statements on bank accounts, brokerage accounts, whatever. Okay, so all of that is a good system to set up. And again, if there's multiple beneficiaries and you have something like a Dropbox, you can have a folder labeled, you know, beneficiaries, where you can put information in it, and then everybody has access to the same data. So nobody's saying, well, you know, you emailed to George, but you didn't email to me, Sue, and you know, you get into all that kind of, you know, stuff. That's the other reason why, by the way, I like Dropbox as opposed to emailing people documents. Is you know, everything is in one file folder. Everybody has access to that same folder, and so nobody can claim that, you know, somebody else has an advantage over them. Okay, so I'm going to go through the tips once again, just real quickly to remind you. First, understand the process. Second, gather documents early and organize financial information. 3, create a timeline so you can stay on top of deadlines and regularly track or review your progress. 4, delegate tasks and hire professionals. 5, communicate with your beneficiaries. And 6, set up a system to keep detailed records and for bills and expenses. Okay, so there you go. If you follow these tips, I think you will find it will be much easier for you to get through the estate administration process. Having said that, it is inescapable that there are going to be frustrations. It may be so. We had an incident here in LA, you may have heard about it, last week, where the court system got hacked and the courts shut down, right? So nothing happened in the courts for about a week. Very frustrating, very frustrating. Nothing you can do about it. It wasn't like the courts, you know, wanted to get hacked, number one, and it wasn't like there was anything they could do about being shut down. They had to, in order to make sure that they could bring their systems up safely. So there are going to be these kinds of things that go on, right? And by the way, you are going to make some mistakes, right? Especially if this is the first time you did it. You're going to make some mistakes. All right, so you made a mistake, so you'll fix it. You know, the lawyer will help you, the accountant will help you. Okay, hopefully if you have co-beneficiaries, or if you're not a beneficiary, you're just the personal representative. You know, just be candid. Hey, look, I'm doing the best I can. I made a mistake. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. Okay, that's the best thing you can do to keep tempers low and to keep on track with all the things that you need to do, and still be able to, you know, sleep relatively well at night. All right, so there you have it. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, ouch, I just knocked myself on the candle over here. Please feel free to drop them or to put a comment in our social media. All the links will be in the show notes after this show posts. And I'll be happy to respond to them. As always, if you're asking a question that's outside of my realm of expertise, I will refer you to someone who can help you rather than answer the question myself. I stick with, those areas where I have professional competence. So you won't hear me giving any legal opinions and those sorts of things. If it's a personal question, something private, so then my email address will be in the show notes as well. You can also send me a direct message through various social media. And again, same rules apply. Happy to help you out. If it's outside my area of professional expertise, I'll be happy to find someone who has the expertise you need to help you. So tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. And see, I was not 100% prepared. I don't have my list up to tell you what's going to be happening. Okay, so our topic for tomorrow at 10 a.m., Business Lessons from the Military, stubbornness leads to death. I know that sounds ominous. I invite you to join me then and find out what that's all about. And then on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time, my guest is Adam Wiseman. He's an entertainment and media attorney based in New York City, a very dynamic guy. And I really encourage you to tune in. I haven't dealt with this topic before, and so I'm really looking forward to visiting with Adam and hearing what he has to say about how we can gain success in the entertainment and media business. And then on Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time is Jiggers' Place. And this is my sort of end of the week show, a way for us to start transitioning into the weekend. So we sit back, we have a cocktail, and talk about all the things not related to our business and professional lives. So we're going to have a cocktail called a Jerusalem Sour. And that's as kind of an homage to my topic, which is I'm going to talk to you about the most Jewish TV show of all time. And I'll be interested to see if you can guess what that is. I will tell you it's one of my favorites. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's so, you got to be ready for the surprise. And then a week from today, next Monday, will be the next edition of Trusts and Estates Weekly. So thanks again for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day and signing off. Marie, you are my bell. Courage at all times, my friends.